When people talk about Detroit, they talk about cars. They talk about Motown. They talk about the rise and the fall and the stubborn, defiant comeback of a city that has never once done what it was told. But there's another story hiding inside the kitchens, the diners, the corner shops, and the immigrant neighborhoods of this city, and most people never think to tell it. Detroit shaped the way America eats. Not in the refined, celebrated way that New York or New Orleans takes credit for, but in the deep, honest, grease-on-your-fingers way that only a working city can manage. The food that came out of Detroit was born from the same forces that built its factories. Immigrant hands arriving from Poland, Greece, Hungary, and the American South. Long shifts that left workers too hungry and too tired for anything complicated. Pride that ran so deep it refused to cut corners, even when cutting corners would have been easier. From a ginger ale aged in a wooden barrel while its inventor went off to fight a war, to a square of cheese-covered dough that broke every rule the Italians had ever written, and went on to become one of the most imitated pizza styles on the planet. Detroit invented things that outlived the industries around them, and planted themselves permanently inside the American appetite. 10 foods. One city. All of them born in the shadow of the assembly line, at the counter of a diner that smelled like frying onions and something sweet underneath. Get comfortable. By the end of this, you are going to be hungry. Number 10. Detroit-style pizza. In 1946, a man named Gus Guerra decided he wanted to serve pizza at his bar on Conant Avenue in Detroit. This was not an unusual ambition in post-war America, where pizza was beginning its slow march away from Italian immigrant neighborhoods and into the mainstream. What was unusual was what Gus did not have. He did not have a proper pizza pan. What he did have was a rectangular steel tray that had been used in Detroit's auto factories to hold small parts and bolts during the assembly process. He lined it with dough, pressed that dough up into the corners, layered cheese all the way to the edges so it would caramelize against the hot metal walls, spooned sauce over the top in a pair of stripes rather than spreading it underneath, and slid the whole thing into the oven. What came out had never existed before. A pizza with a thick, airy, focaccia-like base, a crust that was crispy on the bottom and sides from the oil pooling in those industrial corners, soft and pillowy on the inside. Cheese browned and crunchy where it touched the pan directly. Sauce sitting on top of everything, bright and slightly raw because it had not been buried under the heat. He called the place Buddy's Rendezvous, and the pizza he served there became the foundation of an entire style. Detroit-style pizza was not taken seriously by the broader food world for decades. It was considered regional, blue-collar, too honest to be interesting. Then something shifted. Restaurants across the country began copying the square shape, the Wisconsin brick cheese blend, the caramelized edges. By the 2000s, major pizza chains were releasing Detroit-style menus. Food critics were writing long essays about why the crispy cornered square was actually the perfect pizza. The auto factory tray had become a culinary icon, and Buddy's, still operating today, had become historic. Detroit always knew that. It just took everyone else a while to catch up. Number 9. The Detroit Coney Dog. There is a block in downtown Detroit where two restaurants sit side by side, sharing a wall separated by a single doorframe, and have been rivals for over 100 years. American Coney Island and Lafayette Coney Island stand together on Lafayette Boulevard and have been serving their version of the same hot dog since the early 20th century. The men who started them were brothers. They carried a recipe their family had brought from the Greek island of Kefalonia, and then they split apart and opened competing restaurants and refused to speak to each other for decades. That is a Detroit story if there ever was one. The Coney dog itself is a specific thing. It is a natural casing hot dog, snapped from the grill, placed in a steamed bun, topped with a beanless chili sauce made from beef heart and spices, then finished with a line of yellow mustard and a generous pile of raw white onions. The chili is the centerpiece. It is not thick stew chili. It is a fine-grained, deeply seasoned meat sauce that soaks into the bun and coats everything beneath it. Every family that makes it guards their recipe as though national security depends on it. The style spread throughout Michigan and became woven into the fabric of the state. Coney restaurants opened in every city, each one carrying its own loyal following and its own argument about what the proper chili consistency should be. But the original, the one that started on that block, downtown where brothers stopped speaking but never stopped cooking, belongs to Detroit completely. To eat a coney in the city where it was born is to taste something that is simultaneously simple and irreducible. A hot dog that became an identity. An argument between brothers that fed a city for a century. Number 8. Verner's Ginger Ale. In 1862, a Detroit pharmacist named James Verner was experimenting with a ginger-flavored drink he hoped to sell from his drugstore counter. He had a wooden barrel he was using to age the blend, a practice borrowed from the world of spirits, and he believed that time and wood would do something interesting to the flavor. Then the Civil War intervened. Verner was called to serve, and he shipped out, leaving his barrel behind. He was gone for 4 years. When he came back to Detroit in 1866 and finally opened that barrel, what poured out had no category yet. A ginger ale with a taste unlike anything else on the market. The extended aging in oak had given it a vanilla depth, a caramel warmth, a sharpness that hit the back of the throat and faded into something almost sweet. He called it Verner's and began selling it from his pharmacy at Woodward Avenue and Campus Martius, the heart of downtown Detroit. Verner's would go on to become the oldest surviving ginger ale in America. It developed a mythology of its own in Michigan. Mothers gave it to sick children. It was the drink you had when your stomach hurt, the one you sipped slowly, the one whose steam you inhaled before the first sip. The specific formula Verner had developed, with that oak-aged depth and vanilla undercurrent, became so associated with Detroit that generations of people who grew up there and later moved away would describe a hunger for it that no other ginger ale could satisfy. Verner's is still made today, though the recipes and ownership have changed hands more than once. The sting of that original barrel, aged through a war and opened into a changed world, remains in every bottle, waiting at the back of the throat, unmistakably itself. Number 7. The Boston Cooler. This one belongs to Detroit even though its name suggests somewhere else entirely. And that confusion is part of what makes it worth telling. A Boston Cooler is not from Boston. It has nothing to do with Boston. It is a Detroit invention, a simple and nearly perfect thing, made by combining Verner's ginger ale with vanilla ice cream and blending or layering the two together until they become something greater than either one alone. The origin of the name is still debated. The most widely accepted explanation connects it to a stretch of Woodward Avenue near Boston Boulevard, where James Verner had a soda fountain and where locals ordered ginger ale floats on hot days. The drink became associated with that neighborhood, and the neighborhood gave it a name that stuck without ever quite making geographic sense. A Verner's float, the simpler layered version, drops a scoop of vanilla ice cream directly into a cold glass of Verner's and lets the carbonation do its work, foaming up around the ice cream, half melting it into the drink, creating something between a dessert and a beverage. The blended version goes further, becoming a thick, pale drink that tastes like a milkshake that remembered it was also a soda. Neither version requires skill. Both require Verner's, which means both require Detroit. You cannot replicate the Boston Cooler with another ginger ale because no other ginger ale carries the oak-aged vanilla backbone that makes Verner's what it is. People who grew up in Michigan and moved elsewhere speak about Boston Coolers with the particular sadness of something irreplaceable. They have tried other brands. It does not work. It has to be the ginger ale from the barrel opened on Woodward Avenue in 1866. And it has to be cold, and summer in Detroit, to ever be truly right. Number 6. Faygo Soda. In 1907, two brothers named Ben and Perry Feigenson left Russia and arrived in Detroit with almost nothing but a recipe for frosting. They had been bakers in the old country, and they knew flavor and they knew sweetness. And when they started a soft drink company in their new city, they did what bakers do. They thought about what flavors worked in cake and translated those same flavors into soda. Their first offerings were fruit punch, strawberry, and grape, all modeled on cake frosting, and they sold them from a horse-drawn wagon through the streets and neighborhoods of the city. The company they built, eventually simplified from Feigenson Brothers to Faygo, became one of the most beloved regional soda brands in the country. Faygo did something that national brands could not do, which was taste like it belonged to a specific place and a specific community. Detroit's working-class neighborhoods, its Eastern European immigrants, its black community on the east side, all of them claimed Faygo as their own. The flavors multiplied over the decades. Rock and Rye, which is a cream soda with a hint of citrus that tastes like someone distilled the memory of a candy store into a bottle. Red Pop, which is strawberry flavored and the precise color of something a child would design given total freedom. Moon Mist, a grape citrus blend that somehow earns its place. Faygo became a Detroit institution in the deepest sense. The kind of thing that needs no explanation inside the city but requires a long description to anyone outside it. It is the soda in the glass bottle at your grandmother's house. It is the thing that smells like summer and concrete and front porches, and no amount of national distribution ever changes that. Because Faygo still tastes like Detroit, still carries those two Russian brothers in every bottle they ever made. Number 5. Sanders Bumpy Cake. There are foods that become famous because they are extraordinary. And there are foods that become famous because they are deeply, specifically comforting. And the Sanders Bumpy Cake is both of those things at once. The Sanders Company was founded in 1875 by a man named Fred Sanders, who opened a candy and ice cream shop in Detroit, and became one of the most beloved confectioners in the city's history. What his company eventually created, and what became a Detroit tradition so powerful that people have been known to request it specifically for their birthday cakes for their entire adult lives, is the Bumpy Cake. It is a devil's food chocolate cake, dense and deeply flavored, baked in a long rectangular sheet. On top of the cake, before the chocolate fudge goes on, pastry cream is piped in a row of long, rounded mounds that run the full length of the cake in parallel lines. Then dark chocolate fudge is poured over everything and allowed to set, so that when you look at the finished cake, you see a dark surface interrupted by the raised parallel ridges where the cream bumps push up from underneath. When you cut a slice, the cross-section reveals cake, then cream, then fudge, and each bite contains all three in a proportion engineered, whether Sanders knew it or not, to be exactly what a person wants when they want something that feels like love. The Bumpy Cake went regional, then became as much a piece of Detroit identity as anything the city ever built. It shows up at birthdays, at funerals, at graduations. It is the cake people ask about when they leave Michigan and miss home. It is one of those things a city makes once and then never quite stops belonging to. Number 4, Better Made Potato Chips. In 1930, two men named Cross Mokery and Peter Cipriano started frying potato chips in a small facility on the east side of Detroit. Both of them were sons of Sicilian immigrants. Both of them believed in the way that people who come from a culture that takes food seriously tend to believe that the quality of what you put in your mouth matters, and that cutting corners was a form of disrespect to the person eating. They called their company Better Made, which was both a brand name and a statement of intent, and they made their chips the way they thought chips should be made. Fresh potatoes from Michigan farms, kettles that did not rush the process, a finished product with actual flavor rather than the engineered neutrality that national brands often settled for. Better Made chips have a specific taste that is hard to describe precisely but impossible to confuse with anything else. There is a richness to them, a potato-forward depth that comes from using good raw material and not hiding it. The salt sits on the outside without overwhelming what is underneath. The crunch is substantial but not harsh. When people from Michigan describe them, they often reach for words like real or honest, which tells you something about what the chips communicate to the people eating them. The company stayed independent. It stayed in Detroit, in the same East Side neighborhood where Mocheri and Cipriano had started it, through the entire turbulent middle of the 20th century. While national chip brands consolidated and homogenized, Better Made stayed put and kept frying. It became the chip Detroiters brought back from visits home when living somewhere else. It became the chip at every block party, every church basement dinner, every gathering where people wanted to feel like they were somewhere specific. It is, in the most honest sense, a chip that tastes like a city. Number 3. The Olive Burger. There are regional foods that are beloved, and there are regional foods that are baffling to outsiders. And the Detroit Olive Burger falls completely into both categories simultaneously. An olive burger is a hamburger, cooked however you want it cooked, placed on a bun, and then topped with a mixture of green olives and mayonnaise combined into a spread. Sometimes the olives are chopped fine. Sometimes they're left in larger pieces. Sometimes the spread leans heavy toward the mayo, and sometimes you taste the brine of the olive more clearly. Every place that makes it has its own ratio, and every person who loves it has a specific place they swear does it correctly, and everyone else does it wrong. The olive burger is deeply confusing to people who did not grow up in Michigan. The combination sounds arbitrary. Green olives, which are salty and slightly bitter, and mayonnaise, which is rich and fatty, on top of a beef patty. There is no obvious reason why these things belong together on a burger. Then you eat one, and the reason becomes clear almost immediately. The salt and brine of the olive cuts through the richness of the beef and the mayo in a way that vinegar-based condiments do in other sandwich traditions. It brightens the whole thing. It makes the meat taste more like itself. It is the kind of combination that someone stumbled onto by accident and then refined over decades until it felt inevitable. The olive burger appears to have its origins in mid-century Michigan diners, though pinpointing exactly who first thought to put olive spread on a hamburger is difficult. What is not difficult is finding it today. Drive through the suburbs, through the neighborhoods of the city itself, and you will find the olive burger on menus at bars and diners that have been serving it for 50 years and have no intention of stopping. Number 2. The Patsky. The city of Hamtramck sits completely surrounded by Detroit, an independent municipality enclosed on all sides, and for most of the 20th century it was one of the most densely Polish-American communities in the entire country. People came from Hamtramck's neighborhood speaking Polish at home, attending Polish Catholic churches, shopping at Polish bakeries that lined the main commercial streets, and bringing with them a food calendar that included one day above all others as the most important day of the year for something sweet and fried and impossibly rich. That day is Fat Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday, and the food is the pacek. Paczki, the plural, are Polish-filled donuts, though that description does not begin to do them justice. They are made from a dough enriched with egg yolks, sugar, butter, and often a small amount of grain alcohol to keep the fat from being absorbed during frying, which results in a pastry that is crisp on the outside and almost impossibly tender on the inside. They are filled with rose hip jam, prune filling, custard, or fresh marmalade, then coated in powdered sugar, icing, or candied orange peel. A single pacek contains somewhere between 300 and 400 calories, and on Fat Tuesday in Hamtramck, lines form outside the bakeries before sunrise and stretch down the block for hours. Detroit's celebration of Paczki Day became legendary. What started as a Polish community observing a pre-Lenten tradition became a citywide event, then a regional event, drawing people from across Michigan who waited in the cold for a bag of the real thing from a bakery making them the same way for decades. They are fried in Detroit, loved in Detroit, celebrated in Detroit, and they belong to Detroit in the specific way that an immigrant tradition belongs to the place where it was kept alive long after the original homeland had moved on. Number 1. Stroh's. The Stroh Brewery Company was founded in Detroit in 1850 by a German immigrant named Bernhard Stroh, who had learned the craft of brewing in his homeland and brought a single barrel of beer with him to America as both product and proof of faith. What made Stroh's distinct from its very beginning was the method. Bernhard Stroh fire brewed his beer. instead of steam heating the brew kettles, which was the standard approach in American brewing, and produced a consistent but somewhat neutral result. Stroh used direct flame beneath the kettles, which created a different heat curve, a different degree of caramelization in the malt, a different flavor profile in the finished beer. The fire brewing process was unusual enough that Stroh's built its entire identity around it, and never let the world forget it. A slightly caramelized richness at the base, a warmth that steam heating cannot produce. Stroh's became Detroit's beer in the same complete way that Werner's became Detroit's soda. It was what you drank at Tigers games, at family gatherings, on the front porch, in the long heat of a Michigan summer. It was so embedded in the city that when the company began to struggle in the 1980s and eventually sold off its brands and operations, Detroiters grieved it the way you grieve something that was also a piece of yourself. The Stroh's name still exists today on beer brewed by other hands in other places, and it is not the same thing. The thing that was the same thing was fire brewed in Detroit by the children and grandchildren of a man who arrived with a single barrel and enough conviction to light the fire underneath it. That version of Stroh's belongs permanently to the city that made it possible. 10 foods, 1 city. A pharmacist who went to war and came back to discover that time had done the work for him. Brothers who shared a recipe and then spent a century competing across a shared wall. Immigrants who arrived with almost nothing except a sense of what food should taste like, and the willingness to build something from that conviction. Workers who needed something fast and filling and worthy of the long shift they had just survived. Detroit made things. It made cars and music and steel and grudges and art and community. And somewhere inside all of that making, it made food that carried the same qualities the city was always known for. Directness, durability, a refusal to be anything other than exactly what it is. The olive burger is not trying to be sophisticated. The Coney dog is not apologizing for the beef heart in its chili. The bumpy cake does not need to be refined. The Werner's does not need to explain why it stings. The Potsky does not care whether you know how to pronounce it correctly, only that you eat it while it is still warm. These are foods that know what they are, and they have been what they are for a very long time. And they will remain what they are long after the trends around them have moved on and come back around again. Detroit invented them. Detroit is still serving them. Detroit will be serving them long after everyone else has moved on to the next thing, and the next thing after that. That, more than anything else, is the most Detroit thing about them.